All right. Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. So this is the Caregiver series. We love the first one, and it's such a, it's not a sort of a one and done subject. It's a living subject, and it's complicated, and it needs to move with people over time. So we're going to start doing this Caregiver series more routinely as a place for us all to kind of get together and talk about this subject, debrief, and reminder, these are meant to be something between informational or group think to group therapy. It's meant to be a safe place for everyone to emote, say things out loud that they might be embarrassed to say, ask questions that may feel hard, whatever it is. This is meant to be a safe place. So here we go. I'm going to remind us, guys, of the sort of process here. Come on, slide. There you go. Sonia, there?
I am. So hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. I just wanted to let you know the two ways that you can ask us a question. So BJ will go through a little bit of information with the slides to start, and then after that, we would love for you to participate if you want to. So you can raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question, or you can type your question into the question box and we will read that aloud and then answer for you. So it's up to you. You also do not have to ask any questions if you don't want to. You can just follow along and listen. Just again, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you and verbally you can ask, or you can type in your question. And a quick note, sometimes we end up not being able to get to all of the questions that have been asked, but please know if you do type in your question, or you can send it to us afterwards, we do a second session where we answer all of the questions. So if we don't get to you, please don't worry, we'll still address them. And these recordings will be sent to you tomorrow morning via email, so you'll get a link to both of them. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Okay, guys, so let's jump in. Again, this is some of this, the way we start, just food for thought. And for those of you guys who were on our first Caregiver series, there'll be some redundancy here to this sort of setup, but just to kind of lay out some basics and get us thinking. So let me move my little control panel here. So, you know, it's a big deal to become a caregiver. And first of all, language, caregiver, not everyone lights up about that. We use the words patient for the person actually receiving the care, and the caregiver for the person sort of giving the care. But that's really clunky because, as our first slide implies, the giving is going in all directions. Patients are giving care, caregivers are giving care, everyone's giving, everyone's receiving. Language always gets a little tricky. But no matter, you know, so loved one, family member, some people are caregivers against their will, out of obligation or duty, you know. So however you come to this mix, welcome. It is a difficult but almost always very enriching task to take on, and it's really a role to take on. And that's an important word because it isn't just a task. There's a sort of there's a spirit to caregiving when it's done well that you inhabit, and it's different from a lot of the rest of life. And the numbers are huge, guys. I mean, there are roughly 50 million caregivers in the U.S. So that means 50 million people are taking care of someone at home. And many of those people are trying to hold down a job too. So I'm sure a lot of you guys fit that bill in our group here. So not easy. And switching roles can be really tough and draining. So important to call it out. Caregiver, you sort of inhabit this place where your well-being is fastened to another's on some level. And we'll talk about that together. I'd love to hear more from you guys of what it means to you to be a caregiver. Sorry, there we go. So, all right, caregiving. Okay, the basics of, so the mechanics of caregiving run a gamut. You know, running errands, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the house, coming to medical appointments, sometimes taking notes, sometimes asking questions and representing the person you're caring for. But activities of daily living is an official phrase that means something specific in the medical world and the insurance world. So for home health aides and home health, to qualify for certain benefits as a patient, you have to meet certain needs. And they usually break them down in these activities of daily living. And those are 7 domains: bathing, dressing, eating, transferring, and moving. Transferring meaning transferring from the bed to a chair, from the chair to a walker or a wheelchair, etc. Moving your body through space safely. Toileting, getting to the bathroom, and continence, and the sort of hygiene that goes with tending to continence issues. So that's the official sort of panoply of tasks. Important to note, and any of us will find ourselves, some of these we'll never do, some of these we'll do a ton. Sometimes when caregiving happens as in families or circles of friends in the team, so various people might take various responsibilities on. Some folks, the idea of bathing mom or dad or a friend can be very difficult psychically. So if there's choice, you might want to think through who gets which task. And sometimes caregiving is a management job. A lot of well-wishers to kind of put to use and to share the burden, to share the load. Circle back to that big word burden here at some point too. And remember this picture here, guys, for this next slide. It's not you won't find bearing witness on the list of tasks, not the ADLs. But I don't know that there's a more important job for the caregiver than to bear witness, than to see your person. That is really key in ways that are primal. To be seen in this world, to be understood, especially when we're vulnerable, especially when we smell funny, especially when things are going wrong and we're in free fall and we're not even always sure what's coming out of our mouth or our bodies. Someone who can be with us, a fellow human being, can see us and not judge us and be there with us and not run away and share the experience is profoundly important. You know, it's sort of like if any of us living our truth, it's hard to feel that it's a truth if it's not shared, if someone around doesn't see it too. I think a lot of us can imagine the other ways where the cruelty of not witnessing someone, not recognizing someone, the cruelty of, in geopolitics of not recognizing a country, it's an offense, really. I'm not sure there's a language for it, but it's big stuff. And it's also important for us as caregivers to realize it's not about doing things all the time. The ADLs and stuff, yeah, there's tasks, but probably the most important task is to actually be with someone in the ways we're talking. We can open this up more, but I can't overstate the importance of this one. All right. Sometimes, very often, the role of caregiver tips into being someone's advocate or proxy. So caregiving in this day and age there's an advocacy part of this. You have to sort of look out for somebody and stick up for somebody. And I don't mean to suggest the healthcare world or the world in general is malevolent, out to hurt anybody, but it can be kind of thoughtless and can accidentally hurt somebody. So this happens a lot in the healthcare system, where we realize these sort of pathways that as patients we just end up on this pathway. Well, the doctor said to do it, so off I go, and down the road I go. And then oftentimes it's the right thing for that person. But more often than not, there comes a time where the patient, family, at some point there needs to say no to the healthcare system. No thanks to this next treatment. It might not fit with their goals, etc. And so as a caregiver, we need to keep an eye out for to kind of keep one eye on the ground in front of us and one eye on the horizon a little bit, to help us look around corners and to see what's coming. And this may mean speaking on behalf of your person, as in a healthcare proxy. That's an somewhat official term. It's short for the durable power of healthcare, durable power of attorney for healthcare, the proxy. That's someone who is officially designated to make decisions on behalf of somebody else. So that's in a formal sense, and very often caregiver will lead to that role. but shy of that formalized role, being sort of an activist and an advocate and looking out for your person is very, very key. Sticking up for them in the doctor's office, speaking on their behalf sometimes, asking questions that they may be too out of it to remember to ask. So you're really thinking on behalf of somebody else, not just projecting what you would want onto that person. And that's where I think a lot of the growth comes from caregivers, getting into someone else's shoes. And so lastly, I sort of highlighted this at the beginning, that the idea, again, the language is all off, caregiver. Well, caregivers need to be care receivers too. This is a huge issue, burning out. For one, caregiving is relatively quiet, thoughtless, thankless job. We don't have like institutions, we don't have buildings erected for caregivers per se. We do for patients, but the caregiver, who's such an important piece of this puzzle, often gets short shrift. And sometimes that's self-generated, that we as caregivers feel like, well, gosh, it's not about us, it's about our patient, our person, our friend. And so we participate in diminishing ourselves as a way of showing how much we care. But somehow I've seen this happen a zillion times, that the more exhausted I am, on some level there's currency, that means the more I've given of myself. But ultimately that doesn't work very well. You burn out, and then when you're fried, there's not much of you to offer. See this again and again and again. So even if your job, even if your goal and your aspiration is the most altruistic we can imagine, you still need to take care of yourself, because you're a human being too. You're not a machine. And if you're empty, you got nothing to give. It's the basic math. So yeah, I need to care for yourself. It's hugely important. And what happens oftentimes is the priorities for your own care fall to the back of the line again and again and again. And this is where caregiving can become actually dangerous and bad for your health. So for everybody's sake, part of your job is taking good care of yourself too. It's not a selfish thing. That is actually quite selfless in this way. And then the last thing to point out here, it's not, I think of some of the early thinking in self-care has to do with, now, okay, I'm there for other people during the day, and now I'm going to go home and have a glass of wine for myself, or a hot tub for myself. And okay, that might suit in the short term in some ways, but really it's bigger than that. Part of the truth is, part of caring for myself as a caregiver, part of me feeling good about myself as a caregiver, has to do with how my person is feeling. And this idea that there's the person and then there's myself and the other, it's not so clear that we're spinning around each other and receiving and giving all the time from each other. And that should be. That's the way it should be. So self-care is also a way for a nod to you, caregiver, to realize you're part of a relationship and you have needs in that relationship too, not just for yourself. Okay, maybe that's enough for now. Ooh, come back to that one later. So now maybe we can get to the comments and questions. We can just start talking. So anybody have a hand up yet? Let me see. I'm going to see if I can get out of these slides, guys.
Doesn't look like we have any hands up just yet.
Okay.
Oh, yes, we do. One second. We've got Susanna. Susanna, I'm going to unmute you. One sec. Okay, hey, Susanna, you should be unmuted.
Hey, BJ, it's Susanna. Good to see you.
Hi, Susanna. Nice to see you or hear you.
I just raised my hand because I didn't like the crickets, so wanted to just get the ball rolling.
Thank you.
I'm the healthcare POA of my mom, end-stage Parkinson's. She's in Chicago, and my question isn't about that relationship. I feel like I'm doing good there. My first cousin is the child of my mom's little brother. He has Alzheimer's, and it's getting quite a bit worse. And his wife has been his caregiver, and she has been very resistant to our suggestions that she get a geriatric care manager or find any kind of help, because that's not her way. And in the last few years, she's developed a heart condition, which has continued to get worse, and now it's getting really bad. She's been in the hospital, she's had surgery, and I'm trying to convince my cousin to reach out to me as a resource. And, I say, I've been through this healthcare POA thing let me help you convince your mom that it's okay to ask for help. And their institutional culture in their family is very New England. It's very, we always do things this way and we don't ask for help. And she just cuts me off. She's just like, well, you don't know my mom. She won't accept that. That's not, but I see my aunt doing what a lot of caregivers do, which is having her own health go down so fast that she could really die before Jim goes. And they have another daughter who is developmentally delayed, which makes it even more complicated. So my question is, what can I say or do to or is there anything I can say or do to help my first cousin be open to the idea of, yes, your mom's always done it this way, but like you're saying, how do I can market it? So it's like, you're not being, this is the selfless thing for you to accept help.
Yeah. Ooh, well, not easy. And thank you, Susanna, for bringing this up. I mean, a lot of these situations are just practically impossible, and you're left to sort of, very often you're just making the best decision possible, or the least hard decision. And you're left very often saying, well, did we do what we could do? So that's just to set out, it may be that your cousin's mom, would that be your aunt?
Yeah, my aunt.
Okay, right. So, it may be that you can say and do all the right things, and your aunt is just not going to go there. So this is also important part of the caregiving mindset, which is you do your part, but things, no matter what, especially in the setting of chronic and terminal illness, when someone's not going to necessarily get better, it's hard to know how to gauge success or failure as a caregiver when things are going downhill, no matter what you do. So just to note that, one of the things that's so difficult is there is no gauge, and you're just left saying, did I do what I could do? So I offer that up as part of the picture here. And this means oftentimes you have to be your own judge and jury. You have to say there is no external marker for success here. So that's one point. Another point would be, maybe have you tried, Susanna, have you had that conversation with your cousin or your aunt, said, hey, I know you're tough as nails, etc., but I also know that it's just a dangerous sport, caregiving, especially in the setting of dementia. And I'm really worried about you, and I'm really worried about your health, in part because if you go down, then he's going to have no one to care for him, etc. Have you had that direct conversation, try to get at her devotion as a caregiver? Maybe her devotion as a caregiver is the lever.
I haven't tried yet, because in my previous attempts, when her health was not as dire, when she was not going to the doctor for her heart because she didn't want to get bad news, I hit such a wall, and I guess my asking you first is to figure out if there's any ways to get around people's wall. Is there any magic formula? Because now, it's going to Amy, but they're the kind of family where you just don't talk about personal stuff. They're so different than my family. They're the family, like my first cousin has never had children, but I could never say to her, so like, did you guys have infertility issues? I know you wanted to have kids. It's like, you don't talk about difficult subjects.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And it may be, sometimes things just have to get harder. All the words won't get you there, but it may be that maybe your aunt, my cat is really pushing it. Maybe your aunt just needs to, maybe it needs to get a little bit worse before she'll take help. It just may be. And so one trick is being at the ready. When someone finally cracks and they say, I make a comment like, well, I'm not sure how this is going, or I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up, or what's it all for? Or sometimes people throw these little openings out. And I hear you about your family, Susanna. And I'm not, it sounds like they're pretty set in that way. But sometimes, especially in the setting of chronic terminal illness, people will often crack that window, and it's sometimes very, very subtle. but being ready at the ready. So when that happens, if that happens, then you step through that crack and you say, I'm so glad you said that. You know, there are ways to make this easier. We can get help, etc. So keeping an eye out for that crack would be important. Keeping an eye out for when things actually just get worse, and if she ends up in the hospital or some warning shot over her bow that might just jar her into making this, helping her understand this is very real. The things may just need to get harder first. And then another idea would be, sometimes it's sort of like, what's that phrase? Ask forgiveness rather than seek permission.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes finding a way to get someone, like to get hospice involved, if that's possible. Other friends and family to start showing up and start sort of sharing the load, not asking, just pretending to make a social call, you know. Sometimes maybe it is just showing up and playing cards and just being around, and then things start happening. Spontaneity can happen. And are there other family members, Susanna, around? Anyone who can, the friends and family can just start showing up a little bit?
His younger sister is an hour away, and they've let her in some, and so she's there. So I can brainstorm more with her. And I love your idea of not giving up, you know, to not shrug and say, well, I tried, they said no. Yeah. That's it. To remember, you just can keep on message quietly and persistently, and waiting for the opening. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and it's shocking what happens in palliative care conversations. Very often, family dynamics are tough, and I'll hear from fellow clinicians that they've tried to talk to this family a zillion times about the situation or whatever it is. I've heard this refrain from many angles, and then it's the 100th time you try to have that conversation, or when a fresh face comes in and tries to open the conversation, all of a sudden the door opens. It's like, what, you know, you get the feeling, what changed? Well, it's on some level, it's sort of chipping away. You know, you're just sort of chipping away, exposing your aunt to this idea, getting familiar with the idea of help. And at some point, it might just crack. The wall might just crack, and it just takes time sometimes. So nothing easy, my friend Susanna. Yeah. So and reach out and circle back here if we want to talk about this more, and maybe we can talk about it over time in subsequent sessions too. I'd be interested to know. Thank you. All right. Anyone else out there want to share a situation or a question?
Yeah, we've got quite a few hands. Before I get to that, I just wanted to, Susanna, your comments sparked quite a few other comments from other people that I just wanted to read out loud as well. And BJ, I'm hoping you can respond to them. One of them was using "I'm worried about you" with care, that sometimes that can come off as judgmental if you're saying "worried about you." And then someone else suggested maybe Susanna can ask about the long-term plans for their developmentally delayed daughter and get the aunt to start thinking about care planning in general that way. Okay, let's see. So I apologize in advance if I don't go in order, everyone who raised their hand. Carol Rose, I'm gonna unmute you here. There you go, Carol.
Hi. Thank you. So my situation's completely different. I don't do the kind of caretaking that you described. My husband is, over the last, I don't know, half a year or more, maybe a little bit more, he's basically tied to the toilet. He can't leave the house. And a lot of time he's in pain. And I say we take care of each other because he does a lot of the cleaning, most of the cleaning and all the laundry, and he does a lot of stuff around the house. It helps out a lot. And I do some of the shopping because we don't want him going out, plus he can't go out very well. And so the kind of caretaking I do, I feel, is emotional caretaking. And then there's two kinds of emotional caretaking. One is, you know, we both loved walking and hiking and being out in nature, and now he can't do that anymore. So fortunately for me, we are bubbling with my family, so I get to do that with my children and grandchildren, and a little bit with friends. And then the other thing is like just knowing that he's in pain all the time. And because of that, a lot of times he's very cranky. And that all weighs on me. And I know that I have to just support it, because I think about if I were like stuck in his situation, how miserable I'd be. And I think I wouldn't even be as good as he is, not that he's good at all. And I'm like, so that's the kind of caregiving I'm doing. And I don't know if you address that kind of caregiving or not.
Oh yeah, no, thank you so much. That's why I really appreciate you bringing this up. I mean, we should probably make a slide for that. It's huge. I mean, it's sort of like the mechanics. It's sort of, let's name them so we know that sort of what our bodies need to be thinking about. But so much of the work, bearing witness, yes, but part of bearing witness is being present emotionally. It's not, this is, and this, I'm not sure there's a more important piece of the puzzle. So emotional attunement, emotional accompaniment, emotional witnessing, sharing the emotional load. That's where that's where so much of the pain is. That's where also so much of the triumph and all sorts of feelings are. So your point's super well taken. Thank you so much for bringing it up. That's a huge piece of the job. I absolutely huge piece of the job. And it's a tricky one too, because you're going to have your own emotions. You're not just, I want to disabuse this idea that you could ever be just there for another person, just be totally transparent to their needs. We're human beings too, with our own emotions and our own bodies, etc. There's just no avoiding that. We wouldn't want to avoid that. So part of their being there for your husband emotionally, I guess a question for you, how do you find that tricky to be there for him emotionally as well as for yourself? How has that role been for you? Can you share any about your experience with this?
So the way I fill my cup is I get a lot of exercise. I do a lot of exercise on Zoom and go out hiking, and just, that makes me feel like I can manage things. But when he is upset about something and his reaction to something is out of proportion to what I think it might be, and he's kind of taking it out on me, not in an abusive way, but in an emotionally, like, I just feel like walking out the doorway. That's what's hard for me. Yeah. So, but I can manage most of it. And then just feeling bad for the person you love, just feeling like,
Yeah.
it's hard.
And does that feeling bad, does it pull you? How do you navigate this feeling of duty and wanting to be there? Does it get tricky? Because I guess what I'm pushing here is one thing that can be very helpful for others to hear from caregivers is that there are moments. Let me check in with you, but there are moments in a caregiving dynamic where it can be very frustrating, where between our own feeling sorry for the person and feeling bad for the person pulls us into things from obligation potentially, or from duty potentially, or we're also just basically apologizing on the person's behalf all the time because they're in such dire straits, and sort of filling in the gaps on behalf of another person can be beautiful, but can be very difficult. Do you have a way of showing up wholeheartedly? Do you have a way of checking in with what you're like? Why am I here? Do you have an answer to those questions of why am I doing what I'm doing?
I never thought about that. I'm not even sure I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, you just do it because what else would you do? What are the options? I'm not walking out the door. So sometimes I feel like, if you can't be nice to me when I'm just trying to be helpful, I'm going to go for a walk. He always apologizes. He always feels terrible, if I call him on it. But yeah, I don't know what else.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. I guess I just want to check in, and maybe it's sort of an odd question, but I guess what I'm trying to unearth is how hard is it to show up, again and again and again over time. I hear you saying, You do it because I do it. What else am I going to do? I love the guy. But some people make other choices. So it's not for nothing that you stay. And I guess I just wonder how hard it is to stay.
Yeah, no, it's not hard. I mean, it's emotionally difficult at times, but I never have the thought of walking out. And the fact that I have family here and grandchildren, I mean, that's so wonderful. So
Beautiful.
You know, sometimes I just get breaks with them, and you know, I keep filling up the cups. So far, the cup's always been able to get refilled.
Great. Well, thank you. Awesome. I mean, then thanks for making the point around self-care too. It's essential, right? Are you able to share the load a little bit too with the grandkids and others in the house and others in the neighborhood around, or is it all you most of the time?
It's mostly me. I might talk about it a little bit with my daughter. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's tricky. Like, I don't want to talk to our mutual friends, like that. Then it gets into his business, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So not a lot, but a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I hope you have an outlet for yourself too, whoever it may be, you know, for your own needs, your own emotional needs too. Well, thank you for sharing that situation. And the major point here is a huge piece of this job is to be emotional, to show up emotionally. It's as important or more important than the tasks per se. It's where it gets very rich and also gets very taxing, very difficult. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys, what else do we have here?
We've got quite a few hands up. So Christina, I'm going to unmute you. It's thinking. Oh,
hi there.
There we go. There we go. Hi.
Hey, thank you both for being here. I have a question about the education of doctors and clinicians around caregiving. I recently had an experience with my son's neurologist. He has refractory seizures and he's in his early 20s. And I was talking about support groups and caregiving. And she said she had literally never considered the caregiving aspect of living with someone with refractory seizures. And I think since we know that caregiving isn't, the ongoing chronic illness caregiving isn't intuitive, and that a lot of people, like the first woman who spoke, a lot of people, her aunt is resistant to asking for help or caring for herself. How do we change the culture in the medical education so that this becomes part of the prescription they give when someone's diagnosed with something chronic, that they say, and you, the other person, needs to pursue some sort of education, support, whatever, to take care of yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's so much that needs to be revisited about medical education to kind of come up to speeds with the realities. You know, when medical education was laid out 110 years ago or so, it was a different world in a lot of different, in important ways. One of which was, you know, there wasn't a huge in-between zone between fully alive and you know, and living your life and fully dead. I mean, acute illness was the way most of us died. So 110 years in, thanks to success of medicine, we are able to live longer. So with difficult, challenging situations, but we can keep on trucking. So most of us will die with multiple chronic illnesses nowadays. That's progress in some level. But what hasn't progressed is the ethos and the around care and the skill set that goes into caring for someone over time with compromised health. So part of the answer here is medical education is very ripe for an update across the board: policy, medical school, nursing, social work, chaplaincy, all of the above. Palliative care as a field has kind of come along to make this, to push these issues. So you know, it's coming, but we've got a ways to go. You know, meanwhile, while waiting for curriculum change and leadership changes and policy changes. As an advocate, as a caregiver, as a patient, if you're interested, feeding back to your doctor is a really wonderful way to go. I hesitate to say that because it's not your responsibility per se, and everyone's got got plenty to think about. And on your list shouldn't be training your doctor on how to care for somebody. But nonetheless, sometimes it feels right to sort of feed back. And so as a mother, as the person you were referencing, if she were to say, ideally circle back to the doctor and say, hey, I'm realizing there's a lot that goes with the seizure disorder, and I'm finding myself waking up to the idea that I'm actually in a caregiver role. It would have been very helpful for some priming around that, and if it doesn't feel comfortable sort of offering constructive feedback and then simply noting it now and saying, hey, I'm realizing there's some caregiver issues. Is there anything you can help with? Is there
I actually just wrote a letter last week after talking to a bunch of other patients with seizures, outlining what we'd like to have, what seems to be missing when you're diagnosed, so that you don't have these surprises along the way. And frankly, I agonized over that letter for about 2 weeks and had many people read it because I didn't want it to cop a tone of contention or judgment. So she read it, and we're going to have a talk. So we'll see what happens.
Great. Well, that sounds, that sounds beautifully handled. And I think you're smart to not, to watch the tone, because I think the medical system is overrun. Most doctors are they're not trained to do this well, and they've got a zillion things to think about. So it's kind of you to be thoughtful about how you feedback, but it's also extremely helpful. So amen, good on you. That's great. This is also where if in that clinic, in the seizure clinic or the neurology clinic or in that health system, very often doctors aren't the ones to help with care coordination and questions about daily life at home, et cetera. So another thing to consider is, never mind the doctor, but ask if there's a social worker on the team or a nurse on the team. Very often other members will have a bigger line of sight on the daily realities of taking care of someone at home or of being a patient at home yourself. So that's another idea, is to reach out to allied members of the team.
And that's great. And yeah, we were told that they had a social worker in this practice, but we've never met her. So it's almost like a pre-palliative care teamwork model that needs to be used, that we meet all of these people at the outset so that we aren't nagging the doctor when that's not the person who's doing the work.
Amen, baby. That's such a good idea. There's been an effort, some colleagues of mine at the Cancer Center here at UCSF are starting to do that. Like, why do we wait till people are in trouble and then they have to come discover these services? The second they walk in our door, they should meet the team. And so it's so what's available to you. So when the time comes, it's just a phone call away. That's so smart. I'm seeing some practices trying to do this, or rejigger their priorities and introduce these services out front, so you don't have to come crawling for them. Yeah, and that's
great.
So thank you for that. Yeah, and I love this idea of feeding back is so helpful. I think most doctors really mean well. They just don't even know. They're not aware of so much of the heartache that happens outside of their clinic appointment.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina.
Okay, let's see. Donna, you've had your hand up for a while. Let me unmute you here. Taking its sweet time.
And by the way, while you're doing, go ahead.
Donna, can you hear us? Donna, are you still there? We can circle back to you if not.
I was going to say, while you're looking, Sonia, I was going to say one more thing, Christina, about your friend. It's interesting, like, she hadn't considered, if I heard you right, she hadn't considered herself a caregiver. I hadn't considered that was a thing. Sometimes we're just mom or friend or whatever else, and the word caregiver doesn't light up. And so just to name that too, that's pretty common, when in fact what they're doing is a lot of caregiving. But they may not identify with that. It might take a minute to kind of own that word.
Is my speaker working now?
Yeah, is that you, Donna?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I'm calling from Canada. So I wanted to circle back to the question about emotional caregiving. And my husband has MS has had for some time, and he's now in a progressive state as he's aged 75. And the whole issue of frustration and all of that is very present. How do you walk the line, or do you have any comments about how you walk the line between support, doing for, enabling frustration, and maybe removing agency from the person? So it's a very delicate balance, and I wonder if you could comment on that, please.
It's such a beautiful point, Donna. Thank you. And this is the deepening kind of stuff I'm hoping for. Yeah, it's really exquisite. Yeah, and this sort of the job description doesn't get at this exquisite exchange that's happening and the attunement that's happening. Sorry, that's my dog Daisy. And the judgment calls that need to be happening in real time. You made a really good point. I've seen this. Sorry, guys. Sorry about this noise. Sorry. I've seen really well-intended people overreach, and sometimes I worry that palliative care does this, that we, in our zeal to be loving and thoughtful and kind, we overdo it. You know, we commandeer relationships that were all just fine, and maybe they didn't have the language of caregiving or this or that, but they were doing really good work. It just was quiet. And sometimes we will steamroll over our family's dynamics with the best of intentions. And then we end up setting up, I've done this in my clinic too, I've had this feeling over time by showing up for someone in a certain sort of fully, in a big way, you set a certain tone, and that over time that can bleed into sort of an enabling. And there's a thing for on behalf of us patients where we get this thing called learned helplessness. We're rewarded for our helplessness. And sometimes we actually have to sort of be theatrical about our helplessness to get help. And there's this theater happening all the time and this exquisite exchange happening all the time. So I'm so glad you named this, Donna. And the way, so first order of business is calling it out. Second is just I think one of the great words, whether you're a patient or a caregiver, to navigate illness in the healthcare system, the word agility always comes up for me. So yes, planning is important, preparing is important, and pre-thinking. But as we know, reality, whatever that phrase, you know, humans make plans, God laughs, or whatever else. Really, so much of the work here is being agile. And so one day to the next, as a caregiver, judging whether what I'm doing is actually serving the big picture, is serving the person. Am I here? Am I, checking in with yourself? Sometimes am I here to try to be a hero? Am I here to sort of swoop in and assuage old guilt? It's like, what am I doing here? So checking yourself and introspection and self-awareness is a huge piece of this, doing this well. Checking in with your gut. Am I helping or hurting this situation? So that's a huge piece of your job. We'll just call it attunement. I don't know if that answers your question, Don, and please jump in if there's more to say from your end. But I think this is just real-time, exquisite, tender exchange that's happening, and I think naming it is much the job here.
Yeah, that sort of self-awareness piece is really challenging because, I'm a bit of a control freak, and so, letting go and allowing another person to do it their way is sometimes challenging. But when you see somebody just freaking out with frustration because the problem-solving piece has become more difficult, you want to help. And when is it help and when is it doing for, instead of enabling the person to have their own agency, I guess is the big question.
It's a big one. And there is this is where it's exciting too, there is no prescription for that. Except the sort of rudiments that we're talking of, self-awareness, checking in, communication with the person verbally, but also bodily. What's your gut telling you? A lot of these things happen, and Susanna, it reminds me perhaps of your New England family we were talking about earlier. A lot of this stuff is going to be unspoken. You're really working your gut. You're checking in for body language, that kind of thing. So it's again, back to attunement being part of the job. It's a really, really important one. And I'll just share again, I have, there's this thing people call caregivers angels, and this can be this overhyped sort of putting people on a pedestal. That's problematic in a lot of ways, because we all need to be caregivers. And don't heroize someone for thinking or caring about another human beings. We all should be doing that. And it's also just sort of, it's this mundane, hard, daily work. It's not heroicism. And sometimes it's quiet work on purpose. Sometimes the right caregiving move is to do nothing. Sometimes the right caregiving move is actually to let someone make a mistake, let someone fall even. It's really tricky. And again, back to sort of in the moment judgment is the best way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. All right. Who else, guys?
Got quite a few hands up here. Susie, your hand has been up for a while. Let me unmute you here. Taken. And while that is unmuting, there's a nice a comment from Anne about the gender dynamic in caregiving as well.
Let's see.
So Susie, I don't know why it's not unmuting you. I'm going to try back in a second. Jerry, I'm going to unmute you here. Jerry, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Hi.
Hi. So I wanted to first introduce myself, but also say thank you for doing this. I have moved an 83-year-old into my home during this pandemic, who was on his way to a nursing home. He was a neighbor, and it's been a great fit for he and I. He was unjustly incarcerated for 17 years and has no family. He went into a rehab facility, and I joined him in that meeting when they were looking at placement for a nursing home, and I was called to be of service. I had the capacity. I'm an end-of-life doula in training, working on my certification, and was not really doing a whole lot besides reading and making some artwork and getting through the pandemic. So I found myself now in this role of, man, it's something I never thought I'd do, but I'm called to do it. I think I'm doing really great. And I'm learning so much about myself and about the world and about caregiving, and putting myself in the role of a caregiver is only going to help me as an end-of-life doula. Be more compassionate to the family members that have been going through that themselves. So I just think that there is, I've also started my own, not really therapy, but having a counselor, if you will, to talk about his needs, my needs, the structure of it all in a confidential setting. And I think it should be mentioned that the biggest reason his family didn't want him is due to incontinence of both formats, if you will.
Bowel and bladder.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a deal. I think it's the biggest reason that people go into nursing homes from what I've studied so far. And it's probably the most taxing and challenging part of my work, also for myself, the most humbling, the most, gross also. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to discuss that, the nitty gritty of it, the element of, keeping your balance and realizing like, okay, I can do this. I mean, I think it is worth mentioning he's 6'3", 6'4", I'm 5'1". So there's just all these elements and structures of how to go through that with him. And we've come a long way, a long way. He now has a catheter, a Coude catheter, which that's very helpful. He resents it sometimes, but it's a matter of practicality. He has use of only one arm, and his spinal stenosis has gotten so advanced that he's in a wheelchair. And I got him a motorized wheelchair now, so he has autonomy, and there's a ramp installed also, so he can get out and about if he wants. We live in Maine, by the way, so he's a smoker and also loves to cook Southern food, Southern soul food. So he has a quality of life that he would not be able to maintain being in another institution.
Yeah.
He's a fabulous, fabulous human being that deserves this, and it's my honor to help him. But I guess my notion of bringing this about is that nitty gritty, dirty work that takes a lot of my spirit sometimes. And yeah.
Well, thank you. Yes, this is one of the ways caregiving is very hard. It can be smelly, it can be just downright gross. There's just no ways about it. I mean, it's not, our reflexes aren't our fault. It's okay to be repulsion happens. Bodies do funny things. And so that's why I want to kind of beat back this idea that, oh, caregivers are angels. Well, sort of, but they're also human beings. So you get to be grossed out. You get to not want to do it, and you also get to have help of your own. I'm really glad to hear you say that you're talking to a counselor yourself so that you can process what's coming up for you, your own fears. This is, I think, a big thing that what keeps folks from really wholeheartedly getting into caregiving oftentimes is their own fear. That seeing someone else go through illness brings up their own fears of illness or death themselves. So there's just a lot to process, a lot to work through. And the help needs help too. We all need help, period. So someone earlier in our conversation today was saying something about, in society, we have to get over this idea that normal people are independent and invulnerable, and only those poor, pitiful, sick people, are dependent. No, we all need each other. We all need help all the time. This is nature. This is normal. But just because it's natural and normal doesn't mean it's not hard or disgusting sometimes. So anyway, thanks for calling attention to the nitty gritty. Amen. Nothing wrong with being grossed out. The trick is to try to find a way to stay. And if you can't stay, also getting help. And then lastly, to your point of processing this, so you're learning as you go through. As a patient, I've said this before in this group, but as a patient for your friend, 83-year-old, if you're on the receiving end of caregiving, it can become a little demoralizing at some point. And the times when I've been a patient, when I know my friends and family and professional doctors, nurses, anyone is learning something from my situation, gaining something from my situation, that's nothing but good. So you're looking out for lessons learned and enrichment to your own life to go along with the hard stuff. That's nothing but awesome, and that will help your 83-year-old friend too. So beautiful. Thank you.
That give and take.
Yes.
The symbiosis. Yeah. And I thank you so much. We really are all in this together as a one human experience globally.
Yes.
And I appreciate you saying that. I've never considered myself an angel or a hero. I just considered myself a really good neighbor, and also considered myself, an element to the racial injustice and equality that I abhor in this country. He was frankly guilty by association and being a Black man. So there's that,
Wow.
and the lack of care and support for minorities is appalling in this country. So, I just have to stand up and do my thing.
Yep. And you do it for him, and you do it for yourself, and you do it for the good of humans. Like you're saying, you're being a good neighbor. This is not exotic. I wish more people had this idea of being a good neighbor. And there's also this last thing, I guess we need to stop here pretty soon, but is there's an activism, there's a political piece of this, of showing up for people who otherwise don't get shown up for. There's activism in that, and there can be some pride and a lot of importance in that too. So thanks for bringing that note to the picture. There's something, our life can be incredibly unfair up until the end, and if love comes in at the end and there's a sense of sort of justice at the end, it can really right so many years of injustice. There's something about bringing it together at the very end that can make sense of a life that would have had otherwise gone so hard. So thank you.
I feel it. That's what's up.
Great. Okay, you beauties. Well, here we are at 11. So I think there's probably a lot more questions. So as Sonia mentioned, we'll make a little recording. We'll answer the rest of the questions and make a recording and get it out to you. But before we go, I want to leave us with the question to ponder.
And BJ, while you're pulling that up, I just want to quick shout out to the people who had their hand raised that we were not able to get to. If you still have a question, please feel free to send it to that same email that's on the slide right now, the info@mettlehealth.com, and we can answer it in the second recording, because I realized you guys were planning to say it out loud and we didn't give you a chance. So if you want to type it up and send it to us, we will address it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks guys. And the question to ponder and shoot us your answer to here is, what do you wish you had known before becoming a caregiver? I don't know, if you could talk to yourself, your old self, as you entered this realm, what would you tell yourself? What do you wish you had known? And shoot us your email, your answer, and we'll share that back to the group too. Okay, guys. Well, it's been a pleasure. I really love the way you guys show up and bring your stories to this mix, and the openness. It's really beautiful. So thank you. I hope it's helpful for you guys as it is for me. So anyway, we'll see you next time, and have a good weekend.